My name is Chirath Easwarage, and this is part 2 of the video series I'm doing for you to understand and get into your memories for once and for all the topic of plant life cycles, which many students consider to be boring and also hard to answer questions for. So in this section, we are going to cover under phylum Lycophyta, we have Selaginella life cycle, and then I'm going to do an introduction into seed plants, including understanding seed structure, and then under phylum Cycarophyta, we have Cycas life cycle to do. And in the third part, I'm going to do the Anthophyta or the flowering plant or angiosperm life cycle with a typical flowering plant life cycle for your ease of understanding. Okay, let's start with the Selaginella life cycle. Selaginella. So Selaginella is a spike moss. Okay, so we consider all spike mosses to be heterospores. What is heterospory? That means there are two types of spores produced by the sporophyte in their sporangia. What is sporangia? Sporangia are the reproductive structures of the sporophyte. Right? So if a plant, if we consider it to be heterosporous, that means it produces two types of spores. Those are the megaspore and the microspore. Okay. So who produces the megaspore? We call that sporangium. We call it the megasporangium. And the sporangium that produces the microspore, we consider it or call it the microsporangium. Okay. So the megaspore gives rise to the female gametophyte. Right. If I ask you what sort of cell division produces this megaspore in the megasporangium, the megasporangium is diploid, right? And the megaspore is haploid. So what cell division should it be? It has to be meiosis, right? Meiosis. So the megaspore gives rise to the female gametophyte, and the female gametophyte will produce eggs by what cell division? Because the female gametophyte is already haploid, it can produce eggs by mitosis. It's the same story. The microspore will give rise to the male gametophyte, and the male gametophyte will produce male gametes or sperms. Okay. If a plant is homosporous, such as club mosses under phylum Lycophyta, we consider all club mosses to be homosporous. The example is Lycopodium in your resource. Right. So it produces only one type of spore, thus called as homosporous. Right. So since there is only one type of spore, it can only give rise to a single type of gametophyte, and usually that gametophyte will be bisexual. It will produce both male and female gametes in the same gametophyte. Okay. Right. Now we can move on to this diagram of the life cycle. So this is your sporophyte of Selaginella, right? It is the dominant stage, and we can see it has a very unique structure that we call as a strobilus. A strobilus is a cone formed by sporophylls, right? So sporophylls is a new term that we have to know. A sporophyll is a specialized leaf that bear sporangia, right? Sporangia are borne on specialized leaves called sporophylls, right? And these sporophylls arrange into a cone that we call as a strobilus, singular strobilus, plural strobili. So this is that structure, right? And in the strobilus, we have both sporophylls that produce megaspores and microspores. So the sporophylls that bear megasporangia that will produce megaspores are known as megasporophylls, right? And the sporophylls that bear microsporangia that will produce your microspores are known as microsporophylls. Okay, so this is that strobilus, right? And you can clearly see, right? If we zoom into a megasporangium, you can see it has 4 megaspores produced inside it, right? By what cell division? Meiosis, right? So in each megasporangium we have 4 megaspores getting produced. Right? Let's focus on your megaspores for now. Right? These megaspores, when they are released to the outside, they will become they will germinate, and inside it we will get the female gametophyte. Right? The female gametophyte will have its own reproductive organs we call as gametangia, and the female gametangia has the special name as archegonia. Right? Archegonia. Okay. Now let's focus on your microspores. You can see a microsporangium produces many microspores. Right? When these microspores are dispersed to the outside, a male gametophyte will arise within the microspore and it will produce sperms. Right? Since these are seedless plants, as I mentioned in the previous video, seedless plants rely on external water for fertilization. So these sperms that are here, are flagellated sperms and they rely on external water. Right? So when they reach the archegonia here in your female gametophyte, this is the sperm reaching the egg in the archegonia, this is the archegonia. Right? Fertilization will take place and we will get a zygote. Right? The zygote will gradually germinate within the female gametophyte while obtaining nutrients from the female gametophyte. Right? And will become a mature sporophyte again. So this is the basic idea that you have to keep in mind when we are going to read through what is there in the resource. Right. Let's move on to what is there in the evolution and diversity lesson first. Right. So there's a description about the plants that come under phylum Lycophyta. So lycophytes we consider as terrestrial, and some are epiphytes. That epiphytic plants grow away from the ground, usually on other trees. Right. So as the evolutionary trend, the dominant plant is your sporophyte. Right. They produce both upright stems and ground hugging stems. Okay. Upright stems will have small leaves, and your ground hugging stems will give rise to dichotomously branching roots. These are questions in MCQs. Right? They branch into two at each junction, the roots. Right? And the strobili, I mentioned earlier, they are a unique feature. Right? So it's a cone that is a cone formed by sporophylls. Okay, that is a strobilus, plural strobili. So they can be homosporous or heterosporous, right? So spike mosses, we studied the life cycle Selaginella, and club mosses we consider as homosporous. So we have two diagrams. So this is a club moss, so a spike moss such as Selaginella, and this is the diagram of club moss. Okay. Now let's move on to what is there in your plant form under Selaginella life cycle. Right. So there's again a description. Sporophyte is the dominant generation and they are photosynthetic, right? Because they are independent. Gametophytes are reduced in structure and short-lived. Partially dependent, very, very important. How is it partially dependent? We'll see soon. Right? Partially dependent on the sporophyte. Okay. Now there's a description about the sporophyte external appearance. It has roots, stems, and leaves. Now, keep in mind that these root stems and leaves are not under inverted commas, right? Because these are now vascular plants, they are considered as proper root stems and leaves, right? Vascular tissues are present because these are vascular plants, herbaceous. Heterophilous leaves are arranged as pairs, right? I will tell you what are heterophilous leaves, right? The stem is dorsoventrally flattened. It is like a tape, that is very narrow stem, right? That is like a tape with an anterior side and a posterior side, right? Then this is a definition. Sporangia are borne on specialized leaves called sporophylls, right? I introduced the term sporophylls to you earlier. Sporophylls are compactly arranged in a terminal strobilus, right? Then again, there are two types of sporophylls as megasporophyll and microsporophyll, right? In the same strobilus. Megasporophyll produces a single megasporangium, right? And a microsporophyll produces a single microsporangium. Okay? So they are heterosporous because there are two morphologically different types of spores. Then the megasporangium produces 4 large megaspores by meiosis. See, in each megasporangium, you can see 4 large megaspores are produced by what cell division? Meiotic cell division. Okay. Both types of spores have thick, tough walls, right? Can you see? These are the two types of spores, right? They have thick, tough walls, right? Then microspores are retained within the microsporangium and develop into young male gametophytes. Young male gametophytes are enclosed by the wall of the microspore, then are released to the environment. And in the external environment, important point, only in the external environment they become mature male gametophytes, right? So mature male gametophyte is microscopic, enclosed in the microspore wall, and non-photosynthetic and dependent on stored food, right? So it is completely non-photosynthetic. So there's a small amount of food stored within the microspore, right? So that is the food source for the male gametophyte, right? Again, male gametophyte will produce flagellated sperms, right? Flagellated sperms because these are not seed plants, right? Then there's a description about what happens in the megaspore, right? So megaspores start to develop into the female gametophyte already in the strobilus, right? Then they are released to the external environment. So this is a description about your female gametophyte. They are multicellular, surrounded by the thick wall of megaspore, and a few rhizoids can be there. Rhizoids are similar to roots that will help in absorption of some nutrients and also for some anchorage, right? So these are the rhizoids. Can you see? These are the rhizoids in the female gametophyte. Okay. The female gametophyte is photosynthetic, right? But partially dependent on stored food, right? So the female gametophyte can be photosynthetic, but it is partially dependent on stored food. Okay, so archegonia develop at superficial regions and they are fully embedded. Okay, gametophytic tissue. So these are the archegonia, not that clear, but see, they are fully embedded within the gametophytic tissue. Okay, that is to why? Why are they fully embedded? Because the archegonia provides nourishment to the zygote, right? So it has to be well within the female gametophyte in order to provide good protection, right? Then we know inside each archegonium one egg is produced, right? Then because this is external fertilization, the sperm will swim towards the egg using external water, enters the archegonium and fertilizes the egg. Zygote will develop into an embryo, embryo will develop into a young sporophyte. Okay, that is it, all about Selaginella life cycle. Okay, now we can move on to the seed plant life cycles. So in order to study the seed plant life cycles, we have to know what a seed is, right? So we are going to have a small introduction into what is this seed that we can see in your seed plants, right? So we are going to study it has 3 stages as the ovule and how an ovule will become a seed, right? So the production of ovules is a unique feature of your seed plants, right? So I'm just going to basically explain the structures of this ovule and then what changes in the ovule when it becomes the seed, right? So this has 3 stages, this diagram: an unfertilized ovule, the fertilized ovule, and the seed, right? So I'm going to call this unfertilized ovule as the immature ovule, okay, immature, and we are going to consider the fertilized ovule as the mature ovule stage, okay, and seed is the dispersal unit that is ready to get dispersed to a suitable habitat and become a new plant, right, a sporophyte, right? Okay, so the unfertilized ovule or the immature ovule, as you can see, it consists of a protective covering called the integument. You can see the ploidy level is diploid. Very important to remember the ploidy level of each of the structures, right? and it consists of the megasporangium tissue, right? Megasporangium is the reproductive structure of the sporophyte, right? That gives rise to a megaspore, right? You can see. So here, the megaspore, right? One of the cells of the megasporangial tissue will differentiate into a megaspore mother cell, and that megaspore mother cell undergo which cell division? Meiotic cell division. That's how we get a haploid megaspore, right? So the megaspore mother cell, we'll see, it will undergo meiosis and it will produce 4 megaspores, but only one will remain functional. That is this, the megaspore you can see here, right? And the integument, I said, it's the protective covering. It has a small opening here known as the micropyle, right? So this is the immature ovule structure, right? Then when it becomes a mature ovule, the megaspore will develop into the female gametophyte, right? Since the megaspore is haploid, the female gametophyte is also haploid. So the female gametophyte, by mitotic cell division, will produce an egg, right? And there is going to be fertilization when it combines with the pollen grain. Pollen grain will contain a male gametophyte that will produce a sperm, right? That sperm will fertilize this egg, right? And it will result in what we call as an embryo, right? This is the embryo, right? The embryo. So we consider it a mature seed, like a proper seed ready to be dispersed if it has embryo, right? And we are going to now, I'm just going to tell you here what the fate of the different structures of in the ovule and what they become in the seed coat. See, it's mentioned here. The integument of the ovule will become the seed coat of your seed, right? And here, this megasporangium, after it will give rise to a megaspore mother cell, and the megaspore mother cell produces a megaspore, the remaining megasporangial tissue will become the nucellus, right? Nucellus that will provide nourishment to the female gametophyte, right? And in your mature seed, we have a new food supply, right? Because the nucellus tissue has been used up. That the nucellus was what? The megasporangium, right? Now we have a new food source for the developing embryo. That is going to be your female gametophyte. Okay, that has a new name now called the endosperm. The endosperm, since it was derived from the female gametophyte, is haploid. N. Okay, right. This is the story of how a ovule becomes a seed in a gymnosperm. Okay, a gymnosperm. Keep in mind, right? Now we can move on to the life cycle of Cycas, right? Let's quickly go through the diagram here as the visual supplement. It is not that clear, but it's enough to have an idea, right? So you can see here there's a male plant and a female plant, right? So that means, what are these plants, this male and female? The evolutionary trend is for the sporophyte to become dominant, right? So these big plants will definitely have to be sporophytes, right? So they are sporophytes. There's a male sporophyte and a female sporophyte. So the sporophyte is what? If it has two separate male and female plants, it is a unisexual sporophyte, right? Unisexual sporophyte, right? Okay. Let's focus on the female plant for now, right? So the female plant will produce a crown of megasporophytes. Megasporophytes are what? Specialized leaves that bear sporangia. So specifically in a megasporophyll we have megasporangia, right? But since this is a seed plant, we have ovules surrounding the megasporangia, right? So you can see in the crown of megasporophylls we have ovules, right? So this is a magnified image of an ovule, right? You can see inside we have the megasporangium, right? In the megasporangium, one of the megasporangial tissues will differentiate into a megaspore mother cell, right? That megaspore mother cell is surrounded by the rest of the megasporangial tissue. I mentioned that is the new cells. The function of the new cells is what? To provide nourishment to the female gametophyte that will arise from the megaspore, right? So the megaspore mother cell will undergo meiosis and produce 4 megaspores, out of which only one will remain functional, right? That other 3 megaspores will degenerate, that is mentioned here, and the remaining megaspore will develop into the female gametophyte, right? Female gametophyte will have female gametangia, right? Female reproductive organs that are known as archegonia. So the archegonia will produce eggs by what cell division? Mitosis, right? So that is happening here. Mitosis, we are going to have, in the archegonium, we are going to have eggs, right? Right. Now let's focus on to your male plant. The male plant will produce a male cone of microsporophylls. So microsporophylls are specialized leaves that bear microsporangia, right? In the microsporophylls we have microsporangia. So in microsporangia we have microspore mother cells, and microspore mother cells will become microspores, will produce microspores, and these microspores will produce a male gametophyte that will be known as your pollen grain, right? So this is a pollen grain. Okay, so the pollen grain will enter this. Now this is what? If an ovule is ready with a female gametophyte that has an egg ready to receive a male sperm, we consider that as a mature ovule, right? So when that pollen grain enters through, this is what? This opening here. It is the opening in your integument, right? The opening in the integument is known as micropyle. So a pollen grain will be deposited on the micropyle, and the pollen grain will germinate, right? It will germinate and produce what we call as a pollen tube. A pollen tube. See here? The pollen tube will deliver the sperms straight into the egg. So now we don't, in a seed plant, we do not rely on external water for fertilization, because there's a specialized structure to do that, to deliver the sperms straight into the egg, that is known as the pollen tube. Okay. Now the same story again, like the old story. After fertilization, we will have a zygote. That zygote will become an embryo, and they will differentiate and mature into mature sporophytes. This is the diagrammatic explanation in here that we have. So when you are reading the resource book, keep in mind to go through this diagram first and have a visual idea. Right. Then let's go through the resource book, what is there under the life cycle of Cycas. Quickly let's go through. Right, sporophytes are the dominant, right? Gametophytes are very reduced and depend on the sporophyte. So this is the description of your sporophyte, right? A sporophyte is a perennial tree. Perennial tree means it is going to live multiple seasons, right? Perennial, right? There are annuals, biennials, and perennials. That is some additional information. It has proper roots, stems, and leaves. The stem is unbranched, okay? It is an unbranched stem, like a column, straight, and it is woody. Woody means when you are in your plant form, you will learn about secondary growth, right? So if a plant undergoes secondary growth, it will have a wood, a hard section that is actually your secondary side, okay? Leaves are arranged in crowns, okay? And usually Cycas is a xerophytic plant, right, with xerophytic adaptations, right, in order to tolerate low water availability, okay? Young leaves are fiddleheads. heterosporous and dioecious, right? What's the other name for dioecious that we can say? Unisexual, right? That's a separate male plant and a female. Sporophytes have a taproot system. Okay. Secondary growth is present. I mentioned earlier. Now we are coming to what is the definition of a female sporophyte and a male sporophyte. If a sporophyte produces megaspores, we call it a female plant. And a plant, if it produces microspores, we call it a male plant. Okay, right. So then we have the role of the female sporophyte. It will produce a crown of megasporophylls, I mentioned earlier. So every megasporangium enclosed in a protective layer called integument to form an ovule. So what ovule is this? We call it an immature ovule, right? Or unfertilized ovule. Unfertilized ovule contains the megasporangium, right? Integument has a small pore in the distal end called the micropyle. The micropyle is the root or the opening through which the pollen grain and the sperm enters, right? So one of the cells in the megasporangial tissue differentiates into a single megaspore mother cell. Megaspore mother cell undergoes meiosis to form 4 haploid megaspores, and out of which only one will remain functional. The other 3 degenerates, right? Then, very important, the fate of the remaining megasporangial tissue. It will become the nucellus. Nucellus provides nourishment to what? The female gametophyte. Okay. Megaspores are not released and they will become the female gametophyte while within the ovule. Okay, very important. In the ovule. So a mature ovule now, the definition contains a female gametophyte, right? So the female gametophyte will have gametangia. Female gametangia are known as archegonia, right? Each archegonium has a single egg inside. Now the male story, male sporophyte story, it will produce a cone of microspores, right? And it will have microsporangia on the lower surface, right? Large number of microspores are produced, right? Usually male gametes have to be producing large numbers, right? Because they are the ones that are released to the outside, right? So they have to be produced in a large number to have successful fertilization. Okay, so microspores are produced by meiosis, by microspore mother cells, same story, right? They develop into pollen grains within the sporangium, right? Pollen grains are sturdy structures. They are, the wall of a pollen grain is composed of a polymer called sporopollenin. Okay. So pollen grains are dispersed and deposited on the micropyle. This process is known as pollination. We will have a proper definition later, right? So pollen grains into the pollen chamber. Pollen chamber is right above the archegonia and below the micropyle, right? Within the pollen chamber, the pollen grains will sort of germinate and become male gametophytes, right? The male gametophyte, you will have to know, it produces a branch pollen tube. I mentioned earlier, it's a unique feature to seed plants, okay, this pollen tube. It involves in the absorption of nutrients from the nucellus. What is nucellus? The remaining megasporangial tissue, okay. That is, again, they can ask you, what is another function of nucellus, that is to also provide nourishment to the male gametophyte also, okay. The male gametophyte will produce 2 large flagellated sperms. Very important, flagellated, right? Even though Cycas or phylum Cycadophyta are seed plants, they still produce flagellated sperms, right? In your resource, that is the only phylum that we have under seed plants that will produce flagellated sperms, which is a lesser evolutionary feature, like a bit primitive feature, right? Usually not seen in seed plants, but phylum Cycadophyta does it, Okay, and so the pollen tube will reach into the archegonium, right, and it will, the end of it will rupture. It's not clear in this diagram, right? See here, this is the pollen tube, right, and at the end you can see the sperms, right? So the sperms, you can see the two sperms, right? Yeah, the two sperms will be released very close to the archegonium. So the sperms do not need to swim through external water, right? So still there's the sperms need to be flagellated still, because there's an internal water medium in your Cycas ovule, right? There's a small amount of internal water in the Cycas ovule. Okay, so the sperms still need to be flagellated. That is the reason. Okay, so fertilization results in a zygote. Zygote develops into an embryo. Right, now very important, what is the fate of the other structures that we saw in the ovule, right? So the remaining female gametophyte will become the endosperm I mentioned earlier, right? Since a gametophyte is haploid, your endosperm is also haploid. Integument, that was the protective structure of your ovule, will now become the protective structure of the seed, called the seed coat. Alright, so the ovule after fertilization will become a seed. Okay, so seed is a dispersal unit of a seed plant, right? It carries the embryo and the stored food. What is the name of the stored food? Endosperm, right? So that is the dispersal unit, right? It will get dispersed into, if it gets dispersed into a proper favorable habitat, it will grow into a new young spore. That is basically the life cycle of a cycas.